Hi, y'all. I'm Gordon Billingsley. I grew up on a cattle and hog farm in the other Illinois, southern Illinois. And the area is set apart geographically, culturally, and linguistically from the rest of the land of Lincoln. Now, my career as a journalist and educator, that has taken me to central Illinois, Minnesota, Oregon, and Kansas. But I have to tell you, the hills, the bluffs, the creeks, rivers, swamps, the Southern culture, and the history of Southern Illinois is what remains closest to my heart. So now, one of the first things I would want to say to you and to get you ready for a visit to Southern Illinois is that it's a very rural area. In fact, there are multiple counties down there at the very bottom of the state that have fewer than 4,000 people in the whole county. Polk County, as an example, is famous for having more white-tailed deer than it has people. Now, what I hope to do today is concentrate a little bit on some of my favorite places and maybe a few tips on visiting Southern Illinois. Now, it has some fabulous history and prehistory. I'm most in touch with the natural features, the forests and the rock formations and the bluffs. But if you like a more refined kind of travel, we have a very nice winery trail and some orchards that are great for visiting sort of agro-tourism. So getting there, well, we'll start in Kansas City and the star in the upper left-hand corner. And then if you look in the lower right-hand corner, there's a star down in Southern Illinois, just across the river from Kentucky. That's my hometown, Goreville, Illinois. The entire trip there is about 6 hours of driving time. Stops and lunch and that sort of thing will add some time to that. Now, my advice for getting there, naturally, you're going to start on I-70 heading east. Just before you get to St. Louis, around Wentzville, I recommend you hop on I-64. That will take you through St. Louis on a direct path and sloping downward towards Southern Illinois. Now, in Southern Illinois, 64 connects to I-55 just north of the town of Mount Vernon. You take 55 south from there, and you in about an hour you will reach where my hometown is, which is where this star is, and that's a point that's just about where I-24, which heads down through Kentucky, Tennessee, and off to Georgia, would connect with I-55. You stay on I-57, excuse me. If you stay on 57, you'll connect with I-55, and that will take you down to Memphis and places like that. Now, Southern Illinois to most people is just about anything south of this red line. And that basically is anything south of St. Louis. And in this whole area, there is some significant history, some unique sites, and abundant prehistory information that I'll share a little bit with you here. To me, however, Southern Illinois is really below the green line. And that's because this is where the culture, the linguistics, and the geography are dramatically different from the rest of the state. Now, when I'm talking about some of the part that most people would call Southern Illinois, I'll talk a little bit about some of that and this is one of the sites, the Cahokia Mounds. You'll find the Cahokia Mounds just outside of St. Louis as you cross over on I-64. And the Cahokia Mounds really were the first great city in America. In 1250, there were about 30,000 people living in Cahokia. It had exurbs and suburbs. And at that time in 1250, it was bigger than London was at the time. And London was considered a major place at that time. So it was a big cultural trading center and hub. And in one sense, you could say Cahokia was the original St. Louis. There's the big mound that you saw in the previous thing was called Monk's Mound. That mound is almost a mile around and about 100 feet high. And when you're standing on top of the mound, you can look towards St. Louis, and this is what you'll see. It's that close to St. Louis. It's real easy to get to. They also have an interesting wood hinge calendar that's kind of like Stonehenge, only it was made of wood, and they've recreated it there. And their interpretive center is really nice, but it is closed for 2024 because they're doing rehabilitation for the center. Now, I know that a lot of people probably don't think of the Revolutionary War when they think of Southern Illinois, but there was some pretty important Revolutionary War history happening in Southern Illinois at the time, especially in the part that's below the red line that was in the previous picture. This is a photo of a reconstruction of Fort Deschartres, which is in Prairie du Rocher, Illinois. And it was important in the Revolutionary War. It was built by the French, later occupied by the British. And then it became, during the Revolutionary War, one of 3 forts captured by General George Rogers Clark. And he secured the western frontier and the rivers, the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers, for the colonial army and the Continental Army. So it's partly reconstructed, and it was, in fact, the only stone fort that was built out on the frontier at the time. Now, another fort that's nearby there is Fort Kaskaskia. Now, it was on a strategic bend in the Mississippi River. And this is a view overlooking the river from where Fort Kaskaskia stood. They have not reconstructed the fort there, but the outlines of the earthen berms and so on are still there. It's very easy to see the shape of the fort. And this was significant because it was the second fort that was captured by General George Rogers Clark. And the fort also was a place later then when Lewis and Clark made their famous expedition of discovery up the Missouri River looking for a northwest passage. And they finally made it to the Pacific River. They stopped here and recruited men in boats for their trip up the Mississippi and up to the Missouri and on. Now, nearby is also a place called Kaskaskia Island. And it's got a couple of surprising things about it. One of the things is that it's not an island. It's actually a piece of ground that is contiguous with the state of Missouri, which places it on the wrong side of the Mississippi River to be Illinois. But it is over there, and it is Illinois, and you can only get to it by going to Missouri first. And now in Kaskaskia, there is this thing called the Liberty Bell of the West. And in the photo on the left is the building it's housed in. There's a little button you push there, the door's open, and you can see it inside. And this bell is a pretty amazing thing, really, because it was cast in 1741 by King Louis XV of France, and he gave it to the Catholic Church in the Illinois country, which in France, I presume, was the Illinois country. And when George Rogers Clark took the fort at Kaskaskia, the villagers there on July 4th, no less, 1778, rang this bell in celebration, just like the Liberty Bell had been rung. One of the main differences is this bell didn't crack, and it still works. Now, near Kaskaskia and just across the river from Kaskaskia Island is Chester, Illinois. And Chester is famous because it was the hometown of the creator of the cartoon Popeye. E.C. Seeger was a native of Chester, and he based Popeye on an actual riverboat sailor that worked barges on the Mississippi and Illinois rivers. And this town is filled with murals and statues of the different characters and that sort of thing. And I've always kind of liked the trivia, because I'm a Betty Boop fan, is that Popeye, his first appearance in a cartoon was in a Betty Boop cartoon in a group of guys called the Rough House Gang. And just for the sake of it, this is what the real Popeye looked like. His name was Frank Rocky Fiegel. And he got in a lot of bar fights, and that you can look at his one squinky eye, as Popeye would have put it, and you can see that those fights had a bit of an impact on him over time. Now, as you move, that was all over on the west side of the state, and as you move toward the center of the state, still up in the upper part of southern Illinois, there is a thing called the Vandalia State House, and it was Illinois' second capital. The first capital actually was back where Fort Kaskaskia was. But the second capital here was a place where Abraham Lincoln served as a state representative. And that election for state representative was actually the only election he ever won, except for the election for president. Other elections that he ran for, he always lost. He was a member of a group called the Long Nine because they were all over 6 feet tall, and Lincoln, of course, was 6'4". So the Long Nine proposed to move to the current capital in Springfield. And this remains one of the very few places where you can walk on the same boards that were trod by Lincoln himself. Now, also, as you move even farther over and you get into the east side of upper southern Illinois, Olney is a town that's famous for its large population of albino squirrels. And it's kind of fun to go see a town filled with little white squirrels running all around you. You might want to think about that. Now, as you head south to get out of the upper part of southern Illinois and to head toward what I call southernmost Illinois, where the things are very different. You're driving along I-57 and you get to Benton, Illinois. You'll see this enormous cutout by the side of the road at Benton, population 3,000. It commemorates when George Harrison visited his sister in 1963. And this was about 1 month before it hit the fan for the Beatles. So he was pretty much left alone when he visited, and his sister continued to live there for decades after that. Now, this is the part of Illinois I call southernmost Illinois, and in my mind, it's the true southern Illinois. And it's different because it's unglaciated. And in fact, in that county Williamson you see there, I can show you the hill of dirt that the glacier pushed up where it stopped. And that was the last place the glacier went. And there's a little hill, you just drive right up over it. It's surrounded by the Mississippi, Ohio, and Wabash rivers. And its heart and soul of it is probably the Shawnee National Forest that covers a great big share of the area. And also, a long time ago, the place became known as Egypt, and it's carried that nickname for close to 200 years now. Why did it get that name, Egypt? Well, in 1830 and 31, there was a winter called the Long Winter, and all the crops failed in northern and central Illinois. And all the families came south to southern Illinois because it's far enough south that they were able to get crops. And the people making the journey down there, they likened that unto biblical trips to Egypt in times of famine. And also the area down there is, in fact, the northernmost point of the Mississippi Delta. So in the bottomlands around the rivers and stuff, people really felt that it might have looked a little bit like Egypt really looked. Now, since it became known as Egypt, it has in recent years become known as Little Egypt. And my slide, oh, well, anyway, I'm sorry, I just got out of whack on what order my slides were in. Anyway, you'll find a lot of references to Egypt in southern Illinois. You'll see towns named Karnak and Thebes, and it looks like Cairo, but it's pronounced Caro, like a care package, Caro. And you'll see that Southern Illinois University Salukis, that's the mascot for the Southern Illinois University sports teams. One of the big lakes in the area is called the Lake of Egypt. You'll find Pyramid State Park, Bank of Egypt. So you'll find a lot of things related to Egypt there. The picture here on the left is the Southern Illinois mascot on top and an actual Saluki dog on the bottom. And the Saluki dog to me looks kind of like a cross between an Afghan hound and a greyhound or a whippet. And it is a sight hound. It doesn't hunt by smell. It hunts by sight. They're beautiful dogs, by the way. Now, in recent years, Southern Illinois did become known as Little Egypt. And I'm not sure how that got confused with this famous belly dancer named Little Egypt, but it did. And now everybody there calls Southern Illinois Little Egypt. So that's probably what you'll end up hearing when you're down there. Now, I mentioned that Southern Illinois was pretty far south and saved the people in northern and central Illinois from famine. Well, this is an indication of just how far it is. That left side of that red line at the bottom of the map starts right on my hometown. And I tried to draw it kind of straight across Kentucky. And you can see that it's farther south than most of Kentucky. My hometown itself is farther south than Richmond, Virginia, which of course was the capital of the Confederacy. And I always like to tell this story that if you and I were both in my hometown and I started driving south and you started driving north, I would be in Mississippi 2.5 hours before you reached Chicago, Illinois, and you'd still have another 30 minutes to reach Wisconsin. So it's farther south than most people think, and linguistically, it's picked up a lot of. It sounds very much more like the folk sound in Kentucky, with a little bit of Appalachian linguistic things thrown in. And there's an actual dividing line in southern Illinois. There's a road down there at the top of that part that I call southernmost, Illinois Route 13, that is an actual linguistic line. People talk differently below that line than they do above it. Now, the Shawnee National Forest is about 290,000 acres and still growing. It's really the heart and soul of southern Illinois. There's forests and camping, and there's genuine wilderness and old growth forests. And down there, it's a multi-use thing. They do some forestry. They also do hunting and fishing, and it's definitely multi-use. And it's adjacent to state parks and a couple of different federal refuges. So what can you do when you're in Egypt? Well, if you do what I do, you hike and explore on foot and on horseback. But you can also boat and fish and swim and hunt and all those kinds of things. If you're into wine and orchard tours, you can do that. Chill out with Mother Nature. I really think you can experience some genuine awe of what Mother Nature can do when you're in southern Illinois. And if you're into that sort of thing, we have a couple of casinos as well. So where can you stay when you're in southern Illinois? Well, the largest towns give you the most selections. That would be, most of them are along Route 13. That'd be Murfreesboro, Carbondale, Marion, and Harrisburg, but also Metropolis, which is down at the southern point of the state, right on the Ohio River. And you can see here the stars, they're running across Jackson, Williamson, Saline, and Gallatin counties. That's Route 13, the dividing line that I told you about. And these are the 4 biggest towns in the area. And really the only towns of any real size. And by real size, I'm talking 10 to 15,000 population in each one. The star down at the bottom in Massac County, that's where Metropolis is, right on the Mississippi River. And you'll find some things there too, including one of the casinos. Do you have other choices? Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of cabins and B&Bs that are in and near the Shawnee National Forest. For Google searches, I would suggest try Shawnee National Forest cabins. And you can also try Southern Illinois B&Bs, and you'll find a lot of options for some rustic but nice places out in the forest and near it. Now, there are other things you can do. There are state park accommodations, and that can include camping, and it can include cabins. The cabins are most notable in Giant City State Park, which is near Carbondale over on the west side of the state, and in Cave in Rock State Park, which is at the very bottom of the state on the Ohio River. On the camping, you can do tent and RV. Ferncliff State Park and Giant City Park, for instance, have flush toilets and showers and hookups for the RVs and all that sort of thing. And all the parks have tent camping and primitive camping. I tend to enjoy the primitive camping, and there are some federal campsites that I consider to be some of the best. And they're all half price if you have the federal senior park pass. There's the Corps of Engineers site at Johnson Creek at Lake Kincaid. That's over on the west side. Just south of there is USDA Forest Service, LaRue Pine Hills. And over on the east side, there's Redbud near a place called Bill Smith Springs. That's a beautiful place. And Camp Cadiz. Actually, they pronounce that Camp Cadiz, near Garden of the Gods, which is a place of just fabulous rock formations, which we'll talk about a little bit. If you're into lakes, Lake Kincaid, which includes Johnson Creek, there's Crab Orchard Lake, Devil's Kitchen Lake, Little Grassy Lake, Lake of Egypt, and Rend Lake. Now, Rend Lake is actually a little bit north of this southern part of this thing, but it's a huge lake and has really great campgrounds for people who want to do RV camping. Now, you might be hungry while you're in Southern Illinois. So there are a selection of restaurants in the larger towns, Carbondale, Marion, Murfreesboro, Harrisburg, Metropolis. Now, two of the state parks have lodges that serve food, and that's Cave-in Rock and Giant City. And there also are scattered mom and pop shops, and you'll find all the usual chains too. I highly recommend to stop at the Cave-in Rock State Park Lodge. It's a park with some sights to see, which we'll look at in just a second. The lodge itself is famous for its family-style catfish, and they serve a lot of other things as well, and it's a very rustic in style. And this is Cave-in Rock State Park. This is the main feature of the park. It is a cave on the Ohio River that in this little town of about 300 people. And this cave, now we're standing inside the cave looking out at barge traffic going by on the Ohio River. It was used by river pirates. And you may have seen the movie How the West Was Won. And there was a scene in there where river pirates were ambushing people on the river and stealing their goods and murdering them. And it's a true thing. This cave really was used by these river pirates, and they were really truly vicious people. The movie did not show how vicious they are, but they would lure people back into the back of this cave, kill them, and then steal all their stuff. And in the movie, Walter Brennan was the pirate chief in the cave, and he robbed Jimmy Stewart of all the furs that he was coming down the river with. But Jimmy Stewart came back and got his vengeance, but that never happened in real life. They killed you, threw you in the river. Now, while you're there, a couple of interesting little things here. There's a place just 4 or 5 miles down the road called Tower Rock, where you can go up on a cliff when you're like 200 feet overlooking the Ohio River. And if you want to go to Kentucky while you're there, right in Cave-in Rock, Highway 1, which started in Chicago, went all the way down the east side of Illinois, comes down and ends in the Ohio River. And the free ferry there is operated by both Illinois and Kentucky together. They share that cost. And it's a small little rustic ferry, and it might be worth a ride just for the fun of riding the thing if you're brave. Probably the best state park lodge going in Southern Illinois is the Giant City State Park Lodge. It was built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps as part of the Works Progress Administration. And their dining has recently been expanded and modernized, but they're famous for their family-style fried chicken. I really super highly recommend it. And the dining space there now is big enough. It's pretty much a guarantee you'll get a seat when you get there, even though it's very popular. Giant City Park itself is known for its maze of what they call giant streets. And you can see here, it's these cliffs straight up create these channels like mazes that you can walk through in there. And the people looked at it and felt like it was streets that had been laid out by some giants. It's a very beautiful park. Now, other local food favorites, if I were in Murfreesboro, I would eat at 17th Street Barbecue. If I were in Carbondale, which is home to Southern Illinois University, I would eat Quattro's Pizza. There are lots of other pizza places, sandwich places, and other restaurants you can eat too. But if you're in a pizza mood, Quattro's is the place to go. Over on the west side of the state, Red Onion Steakhouse is in a town called El Dorado. Now, you'll notice it's not El Dorado, it's El Dorado. I don't think people in Southern Illinois pronounce anything correctly when it comes to town names. The county seat in my home county is Vienna, but unfortunately it's pronounced Vienna. So everything down there has a funny pronunciation. In fact, there's a creek down there that's spelled like, if you say merci beaucoup in French, you're saying thank you very much, beaucoup. But there's a creek down there that's spelled that way, but it's called Buck Up. So you're going to find a lot of strange pronunciations while you're down there. And in Harrisburg, The folks in the motels tend to recommend El Ranchito for Mexican and Morello's for Italian. Now, what if you're thirsty? Okay, well, we do have the Shawnee Wine Trail. Some of these include microbreweries. They have tours, they have tastings. You can visit basically any day. This is a picture of the Blue Sky Winery. Now, the Shawnee Hills Wine Trail, the Blue Sky Winery is part of that. Is about a 35-mile long drive that's along Highway 127 south of Murfreesboro over on the western side of the state. Sometimes they schedule bus tours. Some of these have lodging or can recommend lodging for you. There are about 11 member wineries. And the address you see there, ShawneeWineTrail.com. That's where you can go to get more information and check out and make sure that you can maybe time your visit with activities that are happening there that you might enjoy. And as a bonus, if you're there in the fall, that's the fruit season, of course. And all along where the wine trail is, along 127 in Murfreesboro, a town called Alto Pass, and down through there, and Cobden, those towns all have orchards with roadside retail shops. So there's a lot of fun that you can have with that sort of thing as well. Now, if you're into the hiking and exploring part of this thing, the Shawnee National Forest itself has hundreds of miles of trails, including there's a 160-mile river-to-river trail that goes all the way from the Mississippi River on the west to the Ohio River on the east. If you're interested in getting more information about that, the main headquarters there is listed in the slide here. But if you just go to the FS, which stands for Forest Service, .usda.gov/Shawnee, you can get a lot of information about all kinds of things in the Shawnee National Forest, a lot more than I'll be showing here today. I'm just going to talk about a few things I consider highlights. Now, also at the bottom of the state on the Ohio River is Fort Massac, and that takes us back to the Revolutionary War again. This is a model of the fort, and they used to have a complete reconstruction of it, but it's been whittled down now to just a few of the buildings. Then this fort was first built by the French and then occupied by the British. And when General George Rogers Clark was capturing forts for the colonials in the Revolutionary War, this was the first fort that he captured. He was the general of the militia in Kentucky, and Kentucky at that time was actually considered part of Virginia. And he crossed the Ohio River and took the fort. And then he marched up through the swamps. And this was in December, and waist deep water in the swamps in December. He marched up to Fort Kaskaskia and took it. Then he marched up to Fort Deschamps and took it. Now, why is this significant in the Revolutionary War? It sealed off the rivers for hauling troops and supplies for the British troops. It also guaranteed that the British troops couldn't come in from behind to attack the armies that were working in the South and in the Northeast on the coasts. And this fort is just across the river from Paducah, Kentucky. And that, in fact, is the I-24 bridge across in the background that goes across to Paducah. And in Metropolis, it's the official DC Comics home of Superman. They named that about 20 years ago because Metropolis is, in fact, the only U.S. town called Metropolis. While you're there, visit the park. You can grab a good meal at the Riverboat Casino. There's also some other good restaurants there. The town isn't a big town, but they've got some fun things happening there. Now, this is one of the favorite places for me. This is called Garden of the Gods. This particular place in Garden of the Gods is called Camel Rock, and you can see the camel-shaped rock there in the left-hand bottom corner of the thing there, and you get a sense of scale of the two people standing up there on top of the bluff. Coming here is very easy. You can drive right up to it on hardtop roads, and it's very easy accessible trails. I mean, even people in wheelchairs or using wheelchairs can access these kinds of views at Garden of the Gods. So really It's an amazing place. It is, in fact, the most photographed attraction in Illinois, and that includes more photographed than the Bean in downtown Chicago. You know, I think it's called Cloud Gate. Now, other places, I mentioned Bell Smith Springs is a place I camp near. A couple of the things there, there are creeks there that flow under bluffs. There are things to look at, like the Dragon's Teeth rock formations that you see here. There are very popular swimming holes there. The locals go there and swim in the creek. They're big swimming holes. And this natural arch that you see on the right is actually about 150 feet long, and is pretty high. And you can climb up some metal rungs to go up on top of it if you want. It's about 50 feet up. It's kind of scary, really. I've done it a few times, but it's even more scary coming down because you can't see the way it's curved. You can't see the rungs that you're trying to put your feet on. So, but you can walk up the long way, and it's about a quarter-mile walk up or all around to the top of the arch if you want to go the long way. And getting into the canyon where Bell Smith Springs is too, is there are like staircases that were built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. So it's actually a pretty easy place to get to and walk around down at Bell Smith Springs and see some of this stuff. Now, this is a place that's extra special to me. It's Ferncliff State Park. It's the park that's butts up against the city of Goreville, my hometown. The waterfall you see on the left here is an intermittent waterfall. So you'll see it for a couple of days after there's been rain. Otherwise, maybe not too much, but it's spectacular when it does. And even the canyon, which is a blind box canyon, is a real nice walk to walk up through. And that's a picture on the right of the path toward the waterfall. The lake also has a fishing lake, no boating or swimming, unfortunately, but you can fish. And they even have equestrian camping if you want to try that sort of thing. One of the reasons this is really important to me is part of the park used to be my family farm. And my father was born there in the park. We used to visit my grandparents there before it became a park. And so I know this park really well, and I know there are so many wonderful things to see in this park. It's hard to describe how great it can be. To give you a feel for how tall that waterfall is, that arrow that just came up there is pointing at a person standing at the top of the waterfall. This is a big waterfall and a big set of bluffs and cliffs in Ferncliff. One of the other great sights is this shelter cave in the sandstone bluffs. It's called Hawks Cave. The walk out there is easy and it's short, and you'll walk past another cave getting there. This cave is longer than a football field. It's probably about 50 feet deep into it. So it's always dry back there, no matter what direction the wind is blowing from. And it's about 100 feet high. Now, if you look at the western end of, that's the eastern end of the cave, on the right-hand side of the picture, you can see another cave there, and that's a cave in a cave. And if you're willing to crawl on your hands and knees inside that cave, there's another little cave. So you've got a cave in a cave kind of thing. That cave used to be used for Easter sunrise services by the folks in town, because the cave had good acoustics and there was a rock there. There was a natural pulpit for the minister to stand on. And to give you another sense of the scale here, where this arrow is pointing now, there's a whole group of people there, 5, 6, 7 people standing there in front of that other cave that's in the cave. This is an enormous shelter cave, certainly the largest one anywhere in the state. Now, on your way to Hawks Cave, you'll go past this smaller cave called Alligator Cave. Now, it doesn't look real high there, but it's big enough to walk through without bending over for any normal-sized person. And it's called Alligator Cave because of this green petroglyph that's on the ceiling of the cave. Now, that's supposed to be an alligator. And I've always kind of imagined that some Indian that went south saw an alligator floating in the water and came back and drew what he saw. And we're pretty sure that it's a genuine native petroglyph because I know my grandfather, who was born in 1879, said his father, who was born in the 1840s, never knew a time that that petroglyph wasn't there. So it's been there for at least a couple of 100 years, probably, maybe more. Now, Heron Pond is south of Ferncliff. It's actually administered by the people in Ferncliff as part of Illinois State Parks. It is the northernmost cypress swamp in the United States, and it's really it's like stepping back in time when you walk into this swamp. It was created by the Cache River, which is explored by the famous explorer Pere Marquette. And in this swamp, you're going to find everything but the alligators. And the good news is it's an easy walk there, a bridge across the Cache River, which feeds the swamp, an easy wide trail, flat and level to get you out to where the swamp is. And there's even a floating walkout that takes you about 100 yards out into the swamp if you want to walk out and see that. And you will find all kinds of uncommonly seen birds, like the pileated woodpecker is there, and you'll hear it sometimes. It's just a very exciting place to go see. All of that green you see there is duckweed floating on top of the water in the swamp, and the pointy things sticking up between the trees are called cypress knees. That's how the trees living in the water send up their roots to breathe so they don't drown. And in the winter, a lot of that green duckweed will turn bright red. So winter's a great time to be there as well. Another easy place to get to that's kind of nice is the Pomona Natural Bridge. It's about 100 feet long. It's about 30 feet high, and it is wide enough that people could take a horse and wagon across it at one time. It's an easy trail to get there. You can walk across the thing. It's about a 1/4 mile loop. It's a nice walk through the forest and across this bridge. Another place, if you're a little more adventurous, a favorite of mine is Little Grand Canyon. It's a deep box canyon, probably about 150-foot high bluffs. And there are cuts in the bluff where the creeks have flown through and cut away that you can walk down through those cuts to get into the bottom. But I would call this trail moderate to difficult. There are a couple of places where there's 4 and 5 foot high places where you have to climb them, basically. A couple of places with narrow ledges where if you misstep, you'll fall 6 or 7 feet. But boy, is it a beautiful place down in there. And there's a lot of old growth forest in that area. The picture on the left is a grapevine that I'm standing in front of. That grapevine is tremendously old. I don't know how old it is, but you can see it's, if I were over on the left-hand side of it over there, it's almost as big around as I am. Over on the left side of the state near Little Grand Canyon really is a place called Devil's Backbone. It's a big sandy beach with sand dunes and all kinds of things right on the Mississippi River. So you can get really up close with the Father of Waters. You can camp there if you wish. The big rock in the background in the left-hand picture is called Devil's Bake Oven. It's always attached to the ground, so you can go over there and climb around on that if you like. I don't recommend falling in the river. There are a lot of currents and undertows around in there, but also just out in the river, in the middle of the river, is the big rock you see on the right, and that's called Grand Tower Rock, which the town Grand Tower, Illinois, is named for. And normally you can't get to that rock. If the river is way down and gets to where it's less than 10 feet deep, from the Missouri side, you'll be able to walk out to that rock, which I did do one time and did climb up there once, but it's practically impossible to find it even if you wanted to try it. Not too far from there is a little town called Jonesboro. and there's a place called Lincoln Memorial Park, and it was the site of one of the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates. These are the debates when Lincoln was running for senator against Stephen Douglas. And there's a small picnic area there, a nice walking path with rail fences, trees, and some ponds. It's a very pretty place, especially in the fall. And it's a nice place to be because it's right next door to a Shawnee District Forest office. So you've got access to more information about things you can do with the Shawnee National Forest. This is a good indication of why Stephen Douglas was called the Little Giant. He was in the Senate for a long time and he did a lot of things in the Senate. And you can see in the statues here at this park, Stephen Douglas was 5'4", and Abraham Lincoln was 6'4". And so there's a dramatic difference between the two. It would have been fun to watch them on this. And they literally stood on a stump, by the way, on the stump in Jonesboro. Now, here's an interesting bit of history in a little town called Shawneetown. This is right on the Ohio River again, and it was the first settlement in the Illinois Territory way before it was a state. It was sometime in the 1700s. Nobody really quite knows when people first started living there. But it was chartered as a city in 1810, which was 8 years before Illinois statehood. And it was the most important place in the entire Northwest Territories at the time, which included Illinois and Missouri and Wisconsin and a whole bunch of other things. And so the first bank in Illinois was built right here. And that's a picture of the bank right there. Now, when it was first built, it was a log cabin they built it back in, I think it was the 1840s. And this building was built maybe 50, 60 years later, and it's been standing ever since. Now, an interesting thing about the history here with the Shawneetown is this bank was the most important place and the source of all loans and everything all the economy in the Illinois Territory revolved around Shawneetown. It was really important. It was the place to be. And there's a story that one time a little fur trading outfit up in the northern part of the state came down to borrow $300 from the bank because they wanted to incorporate as a city and they needed money for surveyors and things like that. And Shawneetown told them, no, you're too far from Shawneetown to ever amount to anything. So we really just can't loan you that money. Well, that town today is Chicago, Illinois. So it's I think it's safe to say the Shawneetown bankers didn't have a great vision for where the state was going to be going. Now, Shawneetown today looks like this. It's actually not even an official town anymore. This is what was left over after a whole bunch of floods, and they moved the entire town about 12 miles inland from here. But there are a few hardy souls who still live there. Now, the big flood that caused all this to happened in the 1930s. There was a huge flood in the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, one of the most disastrous floods in American history. And the federal government stepped in and helped Shawneetown move inland a little bit. So now there's this town called Old Shawneetown, and there's the town now called Shawneetown that's farther inland. And that actually marked the very first time that the federal government had stepped in and offered disaster relief to people. So it was the forerunner of the FEMA that we know today. Here's an interesting place called Bald Knob Cross. It gets a lot of attention. They light it at night. It's beautiful to see at night. It's 111 foot tall. Now that's 111, and that is a nod to the Trinity. And while you're up there, the panoramic view of the Shawnee Hills is amazing. You know, it is called Bald Knob, so there's not a lot of trees up there, and you can really see a long, long way. To give you a feel for the scale here, that person my arrow is pointing to is my sister. So this knob, this cross, the Bald Knob Cross, is rather impressive when you get up there. Now I'm going to talk about a few things that are just kind of weird. there's a little town called Rosiclare that really was the fluorspar capital of the world. Now, what is fluorspar? Well, it's this beautiful blue and purple mineral that was mined to make flux used in metallurgy, which of course is totally important to the entire steel and aluminum industries in America. And this place had the biggest supplies and the highest quality supplies in the entire world. Now, the statue on the left is actually a memorial to 7 miners who died in a mining accident there. They hit a methane pocket, and it surprised everyone, and they died there. My best friend in high school, his father was the chief engineer at this mine. It was not his fault that they hit this methane pocket. It had nothing to do with his engineering, but you can imagine that it affected people a great deal when this happened and this is a little town of maybe 500 people. So this was a huge thing for them. And this is the main street in Rosiclare, and you can see the ore cart tracks that run right down the middle of Main Street. What it did was it ran down the middle and the street and straight to the barges on the Ohio River, where they would load the ore onto the barges and go up the Ohio River to Pittsburgh, where the steel industry was, where that stuff would be refined for the metallurgy. And they always hold a fluorspar festival there, although the mines have basically closed now. They've basically mined them out. But they still hold their fluorspar festival parades. And when I was in high school in the marching band, I remember marching down along those tracks on the main street. You had to kind of make sure you didn't trip and fall on those things. Here's one of my favorite weird things in Southern Illinois, Snake Road. Now, this road has a swamp on one side, or a marsh. It's really more of a marsh than a swamp, and a bluff on the other side that's about 150 feet high. And every fall, the snakes in the marsh go over to the bluff to den up for the winter. And every spring, they come out of their dens in the bluffs, and they cross the road to go back to the marsh. And there are so many of them doing this that they close the road every April and every October, so that cars don't run over them. But you are allowed to walk through there and see the snakes all that you want. I will tell you, there are 4 venomous snakes in North America. 3 of them cross that road. So you'll want to know your snakes. There's copperhead, rattlesnake, and water moccasin, who all cross Snake Road. And it's probably a surprise to know that there's actually some world-class scuba diving in Southern Illinois. There's a place there called Mermet Springs that is used by all of the first responders in about a 4-state area for their training for rescue and search and that sort of thing. Mary Jean and I have dived there a number of times. You'll see things like this fish on the left, which is called a paddlefish. It's a prehistoric fish. It's a filter feeder. They get to be 6 to 8 feet long, and when they're big like that, that mouth it kind of scares you. It's big enough to put your head in there. The picture on the right, that's Mary Jean feeding fish at Mermet Springs. The fish are very friendly there, and they like to be fed. There's even a few 4 or 5 foot long catfish that'll come up and take a hot dog out of your hand if you want to go in and try that. It's a lot of fun. Now, there are a lot of other things that you can do in Southern Illinois. There's Kincaid Mounds, One Horse Gap, Wildcat Bluff, Stoneface, Horseshoe Lake, Turkey Bayou. There's just a lot of places you can go. You're also near things like, if you use Southern Illinois as a stopping point, you can run down to the Boot Heel in Missouri and go to Sykeston's, to Lambert, the home of throwed rolls, which they're famous for. You may have seen some of those signs. You're very close to land between the lakes that stretches from Kentucky through Tennessee. You're probably less than an hour from there. And this is a wonderful place with a road down the middle between 2 lakes that have been dammed for hydropower. And there's no commercial development between those lakes at all for 160 miles. But there are some great visitor centers and an old 1850s town site and herds of buffalo. And so there's lots of cool things there. Plus you're close to, you're maybe 3 hours from Memphis and maybe hour and a half from Nashville. So it makes a good stopping off point. So that is a quick tour of some of my childhood home. This picture was taken on the stoop of my parents' quote unquote drugstore. It was basically just sold over the counter things and was a restaurant. Taken in 1958. That's me on the left, my cousin Chris in the middle, and my sister Myra on the right. And that should do it.
Thank you, Gordon. We appreciate it.